Apple released the updated iPad Air in 2020, which looks almost identical to the iPad Pro, it made it much more difficult to answer the question, should you go with an iPad Air or an iPad Pro, and when is it worth it to go for the iPad Pro? I've been using both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro for several months now, and I'm going to walk you through my decision process that I use when choosing one over the other. And this doesn't just apply to this year's iPads, but it will also apply to future iPad generations down the road as well. One question that I think can help you decide between these two iPads is this. Is the iPad that you're planning to buy going to be your main mobile computing device? Meaning, is this going to be the device that you can carry around with you? It's got a keyboard and you can do word processing on it. Now, I've been using an iPad for a few years now as my main mobile computing device, ever since I upgraded from a MacBook Pro to an iMac. And I typically have gravitated towards the smaller sized iPad, but ever since I got the 12.9-inch iPad Pro earlier this year, that has actually been the device that I have gravitated towards as my main mobile computing device, simply because its size is much more similar to a 13-inch MacBook Pro. The iPad Air currently only comes in a 10.9-inch display size, while the iPad Pro comes in two sizes, an 11-inch display and a 12.9-inch version. I definitely consider looking at a larger sized iPad, especially if you want to do a lot of writing on it with a Magic Keyboard. The typing experience for me has been better on the iPad Pro because the keys are just slightly more spaced out and exactly what you'd be used to if you do a lot of typing on a 13-inch or 16-inch laptop. Now, another obvious benefit of a larger screen size is more screen real estate. The larger iPad Pro gives you more room to see details in video content or in a game or for reading content, like for example, when I'm writing video scripts for the channel and in split screen mode and want to have my Google Doc on one side of the screen and tech specs for the product I'm reviewing on the other side. So if you think that you'd benefit from the extra screen real estate, take a look at the iPad Pro. Now, on the flip side, another question that might sway you over to the iPad Air is, how often do you think you're going to be carrying your iPad around? I can tell you the smaller iPad size is easier to carry around and throw in a bag than the larger version, not only because of the size, but also the weight difference. My iPad Pro with a Magic Keyboard weighs just over 3 pounds or 1.36 kilograms, which is around the same weight as a 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro, while the iPad Air with a Magic Keyboard weighs 2.3 pounds or 1.04 kilograms. Now, if you're not using a Magic Keyboard with your iPad, then there's less of a difference in the weight, with the larger iPad Pro weighing 641 grams and the iPad Air at 458. So that's the screen difference. Now, the next thing I'd look at between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro is accessory compatibility. And as of 2021, there is not that much difference between these two devices in this category. Both support the two main Apple iPad accessories, which are the Magic Keyboard and the second generation Apple Pencil. So the next thing I'd look at after the screen size and accessory compatibility is power, specifically processing power. Does the iPad Air's processor currently meet your needs, or is there a significant difference between the iPad Air's processor and what the iPad Pro's processor is capable of? Now, in 2021, Apple put an M1 chip, which they previously reserved for their Mac line of products, into the iPad Pros, and just seeing that may sway you over to a Pro. But again, the question is, what are you going to use an iPad for? If you mainly use it to write, take notes with an Apple Pencil, check email, FaceTime friends, etc., the iPad Pro's better processor, at least in my experience, doesn't make a difference compared to the iPad Air. However, if there's a specific app that you think is going to run better on the iPad Pro, that is definitely something to consider as well. And in my experience, it's worth doing a quick Google search for the specific apps that you're trying to run on your next iPad and just seeing how they perform on an iPad Air versus an iPad Pro. Because sometimes you might be surprised that even with some games or graphics intensive apps, there might be a huge difference or there might not be. Alright, the next question I'd ask myself is, how much storage am I going to need? Now, typically the iPad Air has lower starting storage than the iPad Pro. For example, this year the iPad Pro can top out at 2 terabytes of internal storage, while the iPad Air tops out at 256 gigabytes. Now, if you ask me how much storage should you actually get on an iPad, that really depends on how you answer this question. What exactly are you going to use your iPad for? If you're just using an iPad to stream movies, check email and social media, write, surf the web, etc., you can easily, in my experience, get away with getting a 64 gig version of an iPad. Now, while admittedly 64 gigs of storage in any device now that it is now 2021 and moving forward, that is a low amount of storage. However, I got an iPad Air last year with 64 gigs of storage, had it for almost a year now, and the thing still has 39 gigs of storage on it. And that's for my use case though. I mainly use my iPad Air to write in Google Docs, which barely takes up any on-device storage at all. However, if you use a lot of storage for intensive gaming apps, store a lot of photos or videos on your iPad, or you want a lot of room to download movies and TV shows for offline viewing through streaming apps like Netflix and Disney+, then 64 gigs might not be enough and you'd likely want to go to 128 gigs in that case. Now, another question that'll help you determine how much storage to get on your iPad is this. How long are you planning on keeping this iPad for? If you're planning on keeping it for 4 to 5 years and it's going to be your main personal computing device, for that type of scenario, I would recommend getting 256 to 500 gigabytes of on-device storage, which is where a lot of comparable laptops start, and that should give you enough room to continually add files to your iPad year over year without having to worry about running out of storage. Now, the last two things that I can think of that'll help sway you to either the iPad Air or the iPad Pro are this: display technology, and then any other specific new hardware feature that Apple comes out with that one has and the other doesn't. The iPad Pro historically has had better display technology, utilizing Apple's ProMotion display, which goes all the way up to 120 Hz, making the display feel wicked fast. And this year's larger 12.9-inch iPad Pro also features Apple's new mini LED display technology that in general looks great, and this display can also get very bright, which is great for HDR content. So in general, if you want the best display technology possible for an iPad, typically you're going to go with an iPad Pro, and Apple also typically reserves their most cutting-edge Pro hardware for the iPad Pro models as well. LiDAR sensors, better cameras, and of course this year's M1 chip, so if you want any of those features, you'll need to go for the iPad Pro. So now let's bring it back to one of the questions I asked at the very top of this video, and that is, so when is it worth it to go for the iPad Pro? I think you should go for an iPad Pro if you want a larger screen, better screen technology, need a large amount of storage, or you need a faster processor. Otherwise, you're better off going with an iPad Air. This year, the iPad Air starts at $599 US, and the iPad Pro starts at $799 US, and I've left purchase links on the side of the video as well as in the description below. I hope going through my thought process on how to choose between the iPad Air and iPad Pro was helpful for you. If you have any questions at all, or you want to share your experience with one or both of these devices, leave a comment below. Hit that thumbs up button if you liked and found this video useful, and subscribe to the channel to see more comparison videos like this one, as well as other videos on Apple products. For 6 months later, I'm Josh Tedder. Thanks for watching.